In this segment, we're going to discuss 10 more ideas for helping your student to learn more effectively in your studio. And number 11 is something we say, but we don't always do, and that is that quality is always better than quantity. You know, we have a lot of things to teach. We've got technique, we've got literature, we've got theory, we've got sight reading, we have all these things. And maybe for many students, you need to split that. For example, you may want to say, I'm going to sight read once every 3 weeks, or I'm going to assign sight reading every other week. And on the weeks I'm not sight reading, I'm going to assign theory, so that you're not saying, we're going to do it all every week. It may be overwhelming for some students, and if it is, split it in half and do those skills on an alternating week basis or every third week basis. It'll keep everyone on track. I know I plan this year to have theory and sight reading alternated because I believe so strongly in reading skills, so they will be doing reading assignments twice a month and theory twice a month, rather than insisting they do all of it. It gets to be a little bit much, and that way we rotate the skills. If you're a transposer and you want to be doing improv or transposition, you could do that once a month. But if trying to do all of it with every student, especially someone that feels overwhelmed and can become overwhelmed with too many things to do, it's probably better to rotate the activities. So quality is always better than quantity. And if you normally assign 5 pieces that they're working on, for this student you may need to go 3 to 4 or 3. I think less than 3 is probably too little, but it does allow the student a chance to breathe and do a better job on what you do give them to do. So that's important. Now, the next one, I've worked in different studios over the years with people who have a very established rubric about how much time they practiced, what things they did, how much time they spent on each thing. That's all very good, but after a while, particularly in the lesson, you can spend so many minutes monitoring all of that that it gets to be difficult. One of the things I have established, which is quick in monitoring their progress, is when I send my Google Docs, you know, they have a spot for comments. That's when I say 1 or 2 quick sentences to the parent, great lesson today, or you know, the student has forgotten their theory book for 2 weeks straight, or forgotten to do it. Would you please make sure they get that done this week? And it's a quick note to mom or dad, whoever's getting the spreadsheet, because I don't have time to walk out to the car and discuss things. I've got another student waiting. So I want to make sure I get my point across, so I do it in the comments section of my spreadsheet. You may say, well, I don't use Google Docs, I want to have a sheet. But if you're going to use something that you send home to the parent, it needs to be quick. Because if it's not a quick little rubric where you say had all the materials, practiced all of the pieces, whatever, with a quick comment, you're spending too much lesson time trying to manage that and make sure it gets into the parent's hands. Or maybe you want to send a really brief 3-sentence summary every 3 weeks or once a month when you send your bill, if that's how you bill. Find a way to incorporate that connection with the parent so you're not going months without seeing the parent and explaining how things are doing. I always find it frustrating at a recital, because I give 3 a year, and the parent comes up and says, how is my son or daughter doing, when we should have had that conversation at some other time and not in the middle of the reception. So you want to make sure you figure out how are you going to work with your parents and plan for it, so it just doesn't become haphazard. Now the next one is huge, and we're going to talk about this in practice approaches in my next series of videos, and that is chunking tasks. If they have so many tasks to do in a piece, if they don't have it chunked in reasonable, manageable little practice units, they're not going to get it done. They're going to start sight reading the piece and say, see, I went through it, I did it. So chunking down the piece into units and sections, which you mark in the score, are vital, or else you're going to have difficulty. And having said that, I can't tell you how many times I've had students come in and I did the chunking and I had everything laid out and they still read through the piece. It takes a lot of time for students to learn effective practice approaches. It's not a week or 2. I kind of like to think that you're with a student at least a year before you have them as your student. And that's really true for transfer students. It can be longer. It can take longer. It's a big investment to get someone to learn the way you would like them to learn. And it takes a lot of repetition and, again, doing in the lesson. You can tell them and tell them, but until they actually walk it, I had a 3-time rule. It was my way to get them to stop sight reading the piece. So I take the first 8 measures, and we're talking about doing it 3 times and all the creative things we can think about as we're going through those 3 times to make it a little different for them each time. And I actually had to realize that I actually had to prove to the student that this was that less is more, and that I would have them repeat it in front of me 3 times in order for them to see the difference between the first time and the 3rd time, and how that could work in a lesson at home, how they could practice at home, and how they could work maybe half the piece each day, but work it more thoroughly to prove to them. But telling them to do it 3 times in that chunk and sending it home may not work if they don't believe that they need it. I had a little 2nd grader look up at me and I said, "Did you do the 3 times?" "Well, I thought I could get away without it. I thought I could just do it." And that came from a 2nd grader. And I said, "Well, do you see that it didn't work this week because you're having a lot of trouble? Why don't we practice this piece the way you're going to practice it at home?" All right, now I've committed 12 minutes of that hour lesson to practicing this piece. And we went through it the way I suggested, and she was a completely different player when we finished. And I said, "Can you imagine if you did that for 3 days?" But I had to invest the time in the lesson to prove to her that the way I was trying to get her to do it was going to be very successful. She stopped, turned on a dime, and the next thing I knew, I had a student that came back with pieces eminently well prepared. Then she'd fall off the rail for a week, and I'd say, "I bet you skipped the steps again this week." And she'd go, "Yeah, I did." "Do you see the difference?" So we really have to invest the lesson time. And that becomes a big challenge if you are a teacher that's teaching short lessons, which goes back to my very first complimentary video about why short lessons are not a good idea. This is what suffers. You cannot actually walk the student through the process if you're in a 30-minute situation. So that's another story, that's another thing. Go back and listen to my first video about setting up lesson length. Another one is establishing a priority. You know, there is such thing as instructional overload. And if you tell a student to do something, 5 different things, they're not going to remember all 5. But perhaps you have a chunk of music, you tell them to do something, 1 thing, they go back and they play it, they improve that 1 thing. Now have them with the 2nd run do something else. You're going to give them the 2nd idea that you want to do. Then you go back the 3rd time and you tell them the 3rd point you want to make. You really can't make more than 3 points in a lesson before that's lost. I'm talking about in a piece, 3 different things. I used to have a parent that was constantly commenting on the sidelines, and I would say something, one concept for this 8 measures, and she would say, "But what about this and this and this?" And I said, "I'm getting to that, but I'm going to introduce it 1 concept at a time so they can be successful with that 1 concept. Add the 2nd, add the 3rd. Okay? Now, the rubric I was talking about before is you can also consider creating a weekly evaluation sheet, but again, that's something you have to do. You have to decide how much time of your lesson you're going to use to manage rubrics. And if it gets overdone, you can spend 7 minutes of a half an hour lesson trying to go through all these rubrics, and it's too much. So you really have to pick 1 thing that you like and do that. Now, finally, my last ones are really a little bit, we've been talking about all the things our students don't often do when they come in, but you want to make sure that you praise successes. I think we went through a period of time as teachers and parents where we praised our kids for everything, you know, from getting up in the morning to washing, brushing their teeth. And that got to be too much and it got to be ridiculous. So, but when they do something right, be sure you're not so anxious to go to the next thing that you don't stop to tell them that they did a good job. And that was exactly what you were looking for, because nothing beats success like success. So well-deserved praise is a big motivational tool. We should use it. I was just realizing the other day, I was so busy worrying about what was next that I realized I wasn't giving my students enough praise in the recent weeks, and I backed myself off and said, wait a minute, you're becoming a grump. You want too much. Back up and make sure they know that you appreciate them. Now, the next thing is outlining the lessons for the week, making sure whatever rubric, whatever way that you lay out the lessons. I can't tell you how many students have come as transfers and nothing more is on the notebook than the page number and what piece it is. But there's no instructions. You need instructions. They need to know how to do it, okay? Number 19 is repeat, repeat, and repeat again. You know, there was an old saying that said that the best educator is repetition. And we've sort of fallen out of that, but the reality is it's true. There's something out there that a student needs to see a word 100 times before it's theirs when they're learning to read. I don't think it's all that different for reading music. I think they need to see things hundreds of times before they actually internalize it to the point it's part of them. And remember finally in this video that nothing beats success like success, and that's what we want. We want success because if they're successful, they're more likely to want to continue on and develop their skills and make music a part of lifelong learning, which is the point. We want them to see that it's something valuable that they would not want to give up readily and that it's an important part of their week. And so success is key. So if we're not getting success, we need to find a way to get it. We need to find all the different ways that we can teach students so that they can be successful, so that they are happy to come to lessons and that they are progressing nicely, because that's the key. So I hope you've enjoyed this video today. I also gave you the sheets that you have a lot of this that you can just put in your binders and review, so you didn't have to take notes, hopefully, while I was speaking. And I hope that the student demonstration was helpful to you so that you can see the value of working with students in a different way. Particularly the multisensory approach, I think, is greatly missing in our teaching, and we need to think about the ways in which students give back to us what we are telling them. So have a great summer. I hope you enjoy these videos as much as I enjoy making them for you, and I hope you'll look at the next videos we have coming up. The next video is on reading and teaching reading skills for success, and we'll be talking about that in video number 5. Thank you.